Following the Bondi Beach terror
On
attack
August
in
17th,
Australia,
about 4 months
Israel's
ago,
Prime Minister
I
Benjamin
sent
Netanyahu
Prime Minister
addressed the
Albanese
incident in a
of,
nationally broadcast
Australia
speech.
a
His
letter
message went beyond
which I gave
condemning
him
the
warning
attackers. He directly
that
accused Australia's
the
Prime
Australian
Minister
government's policy
Anthony Albanese of
was
negligence.
promoting
Netanyahu said he
and
had
encouraging
warned Albanese
anti-Semitism
months
in
earlier
Australia.
about rising antisemitism in Australia,
Your call
and that
for a
those warnings were
Palestinian
ignored.
state pours full
The
fuel
attack
on the
targeted
anti-Semitic
Jewish
fire.
Australians
It
gathered to
rewards
celebrate
Hamas
Hanukkah,
terrorism.
a religious
It
festival.
emboldens those who
It
menace
shocked a
Australian
country that
Jews
often sees
and
itself
encourages
as
the Jew hatred
distant from the
now
conflicts of the
stalking
Middle
your
East.
streets.
But the reaction that followed
Antisemitism is a
pushed the
cancer.
story
It
onto the world
spreads when
stage.
leaders stay silent.
From there,
It
the
retreats
language
when leaders
escalated.
act. I call upon you
Netanyahu
to
linked
replace
anti-Semitism
weakness
in
with action,
Australia to global
appeasement with
terrorism,
resolve.
to violence in the Middle
Instead,
East, and to a
Prime
broader
Minister,
struggle between what
you
he
replace
described as shared
weakness
Western
with
values
with
and
weakness,
those who seek to
and
destroy them.
appeasement with more
This is
appeasement.
not just about one
Your
attack.
government did
It is about
nothing
how
to
violence
stop the
travels
spread of
across borders,
anti-Semitism in
how
Australia.
leaders respond,
You did
and
nothing
how words
to
spoken
curb
in one
the
capital
cancer cells
echo
that
in
were
another.
growing inside your
When you
country.
first heard about this
You
story,
took no action.
what was your initial
You let the
reaction?
disease spread.
Let me know in the comments.
And the result
Before
is
we
the
go
horrific
further,
attacks
don't
on
forget
Jews
to
we
like
saw
this
today.
video and subscribe to the channel if
We
you
saw
value
an action of a
calm,
brave man.
fact-based
Turns out a
analysis.
Muslim brave man,
To
and I salute
understand
him.
this moment, we
That
need
stopped
to
one
step
of
back.
these terrorists from killing
Antisemitism is
innocent
not new.
Jews.
For
But it
centuries,
requires the action
Jewish
of your
communities
government,
have faced discrimination,
which you're not taking.
violence, and attempts at
And you
erasure.
have to.
In the
Because
modern
history
era,
will not
terrorism
forgive
has become
hesitation
one
and
of the
weakness.
tools used by
It will
extremist
honor
groups to
action
target
and
Jews,
strength.
not only in
That's what
Israel,
Israel
but
expects
across
of
the world.
each of your
In the
governments
Middle
the
East,
West and
militant
elsewhere.
organizations like Hamas
Because the disease
openly
spreads
frame their
and it will
violence as
consume you as
resistance,
well.
while
But we're
Israel
worried
and many
right now
Western
about
governments
our people,
classify
our
them as
safety,
terrorist
and we
groups.
do not remain
The Israeli
silent.
government argues
We
that
fight
attacks
those
on
who
Jewish
try to
communities
annihilate
abroad
us.
are part of the same
They're not only
ideology
trying to
that
annihilate
fuels
us,
attacks inside
They attack
Israel.
us because they attack
Over
the
the
West.
past
In
year,
Syria,
tensions around the
saw
Israel-Palestine
yesterday
conflict have intensified
2
globally.
American soldiers
Protests, political
and
debates,
one
and
American,
online campaigns have spread into
interpreter
countries far from the
killed
region
as well.
itself.
Killed
In some
because
cases,
they
these
represent
tensions have
our common
spilled
culture.
into threats and
Now,
violence
as a
against Jewish
result of
communities.
this, Secretary of War Pete
Australia
Hegseth
has
said
not
the
been
following.
immune.
He said,
Jewish
"Let it be
organizations
known
there have
that if
raised
you target
concerns about
Americans
hate
anywhere
speech,
in the world, you
vandalism,
will
and
spend the rest
intimidation.
of your brief,
At the
anxious
same
life
time, the
knowing
Australian
the
government
United
has
States
faced
will hunt
pressure
you,
from
find
different
you,
groups
and
over its
ruthlessly
position
kill
on
you."
Palestinian statehood
We
and
send
Middle
our
East
condolences
diplomacy.
to the people of America.
It was in this
And I want to
climate
say
that
that our
Netanyahu says
policy
he
is
sent a
exactly
warning letter
that
to
policy.
Prime Minister Albanese
That's why
in
those who
August,
target Israelis,
arguing that political
target our
rhetoric
soldiers,
could have
try to
unintended
kill them,
consequences on
or
Jewish
try
safety.
to hurt them.
Do
And
you
when-
think this
as
issue could have
happened
been
in Gaza
avoided if
yesterday,
earlier decisions
we
were handled
take
differently?
action.
Share your
They will
thoughts below.
spend the rest of their
Let's
brief,
separate
anxious
what is
lives knowing
known
that
from what
Israel
is
will hunt them,
claimed.
find them, and
Confirmed
ruthlessly
facts
dispose of them.
include the attack
That
at
is
Bondi
American
Beach
policy.
during
This
a
is Israel's
Hanukkah
policy.
celebration and
It's not
injuries
policy in
sustained
Gaza,
by members of
in
the Jewish
Lebanon,
community.
Anywhere
Australian
around us,
authorities
we
are
do not
investigating
sit
the
by and
incident
let
as an
these
act of
killers kill us.
terrorism. It is also confirmed that a bystander intervened, preventing further harm. It is also confirmed that Prime Minister Netanyahu delivered a televised address responding to the attack. In that speech, he read from a letter he said was sent to Prime Minister Albanese in August. The claims come next. Netanyahu claims the Australian government's policies, particularly its support for a Palestinian state, encouraged anti-Semitism domestically. He argues that political language can embolden extremists. Netanyahu also claims that the Australian government failed to act after receiving warnings, allowing what he describes as a cancer of anti-Semitism to spread. What remains unclear is the direct link between government policy and the actions of the attackers. Investigations are ongoing, and Australian authorities have not publicly accepted Netanyahu's characterization of negligence. Another point of uncertainty is how the attackers were radicalized and whether their motivations were local, international, or a combination of both. Which of these facts or claims do you find most troubling or most convincing? Why? Supporters of Netanyahu's position argue that anti-Semitism must be confronted aggressively wherever it appears. They believe political leaders have a responsibility to anticipate how their words may be interpreted by extremists. From this view, silence or cautious diplomacy can be read as weakness. Netanyahu's supporters see his language as a warning not just to Australia, but to all Western governments that failing to act early can lead to violence later. They also argue that global terrorism does not respect borders. An attack on Jews in Australia, in their view, is connected to the same ideology that attacks Israelis, Americans, and others. Critics argue that Netanyahu's remarks unfairly shift blame. They say linking Australian domestic policy to a terrorist attack oversimplifies complex social dynamics. From this angle, responsibility lies with the attackers themselves, not with foreign leaders or diplomatic positions. Critics also worry that such statements could inflame tensions, making it harder for governments to manage diverse societies peacefully. Some also point out that equating support for Palestinian statehood with antisemitism risks shutting down legitimate political debate. Security analysts often take a middle view. They note that political rhetoric can influence social climates, but rarely causes violence on its own. Radicalization is usually a long process involving ideology, networks, and personal grievances. Experts also caution that international blame can complicate cooperation at a time when intelligence sharing and community trust are critical. Which perspective makes the most sense to you right now, and what do you think others are missing? If you appreciate balanced storytelling without propaganda, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, what happens next? One possible outcome is heightened security for Jewish communities in Australia and elsewhere. Government may increase surveillance, policing, and intelligence coordination to prevent copycat attacks. Diplomatically, this episode could strain relations between Israel and Australia, at least in the short term. Strong public accusations can make quiet cooperation more difficult. There is also the risk of broader polarization. Strong language can harden positions, making it harder for societies to separate criticism of governments from hatred toward people. On the other hand, this moment could prompt deeper conversations about how leaders address rising extremism without inflaming social divisions. Some analysts suggest it could lead to clearer guidelines on political speech and stronger protections for minority communities. Long-term, the way this situation is handled may influence how other countries respond to similar incidents, whether through confrontation, diplomacy, or internal reform. If you were in charge, what would you prioritize first in dealing with this situation? Beyond the headlines, this story raises broader questions. It asks how leaders should speak in moments of crisis. When does strong language protect people, and when does it deepen divisions? How do governments balance free political debate with the responsibility to prevent harm? It also highlights how global conflicts increasingly play out locally. Violence no longer stays confined to one region. Ideas, grievances, and hatred travel faster than ever. For democracies, the challenge is especially delicate. They must protect minority communities without undermining civil liberties or turning political disagreements into security threats. This moment is also a reminder that leadership is judged not only by action, but by tone. Words can reassure, warn, or provoke, and once spoken, they cannot be taken back. For more deep, thoughtful analysis like this, make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications. At its core, this story is about fear, responsibility, and how societies respond when violence crosses boundaries. We've looked at the attack itself, the claims made by Israel's Prime Minister, the questions facing Australia's leadership, and the wider implications for global politics. What remains unresolved is how to confront extremism without creating new fault lines. There are no simple answers here, only trade-offs, risks, and difficult choices. What matters most is that these conversations remain grounded in facts, not fear, and that space remains for dialogue rather than escalation. So where do you stand on this issue now? Has your view changed after hearing the full context? Let's talk in the comments.